Mark Turner slouched in his office chair, eyes bleary from the fluorescent lights overhead. The hum of the air conditioner and the clicking of keyboards around him created a familiar, numbing rhythm. He was just another office drone, another cog in the wheel, chasing deadlines and wondering when his life would ever change. A cup of cold coffee sat forgotten on his desk, its dark surface broken only by a few forlorn bubbles. Then, the phone rang. Mark glanced at the screen, his eyes narrowing. It wasn't a number he recognized. He almost ignored it, considering how many robocalls had bombarded him lately, promising everything from debt relief to questionable miracle cures. He was about to hit decline when something caught his eye. A name flashed across the screen, Kalian Empire. He frowned. There had to be some mistake. "Hello?" Mark answered, his voice rough with confusion. A metallic voice on the other end was at once cold and commanding. "This is Kalian Command. Prepare for immediate surrender or face destruction. Your species has 30 minutes. Mark's brain sputtered. "Wait, what?" The voice continued, as if Mark hadn't spoken. "We are the Kalian Empire. Your planet is now under the jurisdiction of our fleet. Cease all resistance. Surrender your leaders." Mark blinked, feeling the blood drain from his face. He glanced at his computer screen, the blue glow of an open document glaring back at him, offering no help. What in the hell was going on? Was this some kind of prank? No, this wasn't right. He cleared his throat. "Look, this is a joke, right? You've got the wrong guy. I'm just..." The voice interrupted, sharper now. "You are not mistaken, human. This is no joke. You have been warned." Suddenly, Mark's phone screen flickered. Static crackled, then cleared to show a grainy image of an enormous spacecraft, a ship so large it dwarfed even the tallest skyscrapers. He could just make out the intricate, alien symbols scrawled across its hull, the ship's presence so ominous it made his throat tighten. Mark felt his pulse quicken. He stood up, heart hammering in his chest. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. The voice on the phone was unwavering. "This is your final warning. We will commence planetary annihilation in 30 minutes. Prepare accordingly." The line went dead. Mark stood there, frozen, staring at his phone. His mind reeled as the image of the ship lingered in his vision. Was it real? Was this some kind of elaborate scam? His hand trembled slightly as he placed the phone down, trying to steady his breathing. He glanced around the office. No one had seemed to notice. The hum of typing and clicking continued, but the air felt heavy with something he couldn't quite place. His chest tightened. Was this a real threat? He turned to his colleague, Claire, seated across the room, her attention focused on her screen. He walked toward her, trying to shake the unsettling feeling crawling up his spine. "Claire," Mark said, voice shaking a little more than he'd intended, Did you get a strange call? Something about a Kalian Empire?" She didn't look up. "Probably another scam call. You know how it is. Just block it." "No, Claire, you don't get it." He leaned over her desk, his tone urgent. "The call, it was real. They said we have 30 minutes before they destroy Earth." Now Claire looked up, blinking in confusion. "What? Are you serious?" she asked, voice laced with disbelief. Her expression flickered, eyes narrowing. "Is this some kind of prank? It sounds like something out of a bad sci-fi movie." Mark clenched his fists. I don't know, but they showed me a ship. A massive one. It's out there, right now." Claire stared at him, and for a moment, she seemed to be weighing the sincerity in his eyes. Slowly, her skepticism faded. All right. Hold on." She grabbed her phone and began typing rapidly. Seconds passed. Then she stopped. "There's nothing," she muttered, brows furrowed. "No alerts, no news, nothing about an alien fleet." "Then it's real, Claire," Mark said, his voice low and strained. He suddenly felt very small, standing there in his work clothes. A man in a cubicle, threatened by forces beyond comprehension. Claire's fingers hovered over her phone screen. Look, it doesn't make sense, but we need to check. She stopped mid-sentence. The screen in front of her shifted. It wasn't a message from a news outlet. It was the same image Mark had seen, a colossal alien ship in orbit above Earth. The color drained from her face, just as it had his. Claire swallowed hard. Holy shit. The world had just changed. Mark's breath caught in his throat. They're coming, Claire, he said, a raw edge to his voice. And I don't know what to do. Claire reached for her jacket, her face set in a determined mask. First, we find out if this is real. Then, we figure out how to survive. As she moved past him, Mark stood frozen for a moment. What could one person do against an alien invasion? Was it even possible to fight back? He gritted his teeth. One thing was certain, it was no longer a question of if they would fight, but how they would do it. And Mark Turner, just an office worker a moment ago, had just become one of the last hopes for humanity's survival. The clock was ticking. Mark sat at his kitchen table, the sterile glow of his phone illuminating his face in the dim room. Claire's warning still echoed in his mind. We need to figure out if this is real, and if it is, how we fight back. It was a simple enough command, but Mark had never felt more unprepared. There was no playbook for facing an alien invasion. The phone screen showed nothing but a static image of the alien ship, a menacing, dark silhouette against the pale blue sky, its size impossible to comprehend. The hum of the air conditioning did little to calm him. It was as if the air itself had thickened, pressing down on his chest. Claire's voice broke the silence. Mark, I found something. He jerked his head up, nearly knocking his phone off the table. Claire was standing in the doorway, phone in hand, eyes wide with disbelief. This is no joke, she said, her voice tight. It's on every news outlet now. The Kalian Empire isn't some hoax. They're here. Mark felt his heart skip a beat. Wait, how do you know it's real? She motioned for him to follow her. The government just confirmed it. The ship's real. And it's massive. Mark stood, his legs stiff from the tension in his muscles. But they said they were going to destroy us. We've got 30 minutes. Yeah, I know, Claire interrupted, cutting through his panic. But I'm not just sitting here waiting to die. We need to do something. Mark opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could they possibly do? They weren't soldiers. They were just regular people, stuck in a world that was suddenly too large and too hostile to survive in. Claire pulled up a map of the world on her phone. I've been tracking movements. Every military base, every defense system, they're all mobilizing, but the aliens are picking them off one by one. There's no way the Earth's armies stand a chance against that ship. Mark stared at the map. Red dots blinked across it, marking the locations of military sites that had already fallen. It was a massacre. His eyes flicked back to Claire, who was already tapping away at her screen. What are you thinking? He asked, his voice shaky. Claire paused, fingers hovering over the screen. There's a facility, deep in the mountains. It's a government research lab, high security. They've been working on something classified for years. If there's anything that could help us fight back, it's there. Mark blinked. How do we even get in? A sly grin tugged at Claire's lips, and for the first time in what felt like hours, Mark felt a spark of hope. I've got connections. The drive to the mountain lab was tense, the engine's hum almost drowned out by the constant barrage of news alerts on Claire's phone. The sky overhead was now dark, illuminated only by the distant lights of a few scattered cities still standing. The world was holding its breath, waiting for something, anything, that could make sense of the chaos unfolding. Mark kept his eyes fixed on the road, his thoughts racing. How had things escalated so quickly? One moment, he was just an ordinary guy, punching in his hours at a dead-end job. The next, he was thrust into the center of a global crisis, with no training, no plan, only a rapidly ticking clock and an ally who seemed oddly calm under pressure. How much longer? Mark asked, his voice betraying his anxiety. Claire's gaze remained steady, her eyes scanning the road ahead. About 15 minutes. We'll get in, figure out what they've got, and maybe find a way to hit back. Find a way to hit back. The phrase sounded so absurd, but the reality was undeniable. It was the only thing they could do. The alternative was to sit and wait to die. Claire's fingers drummed against the dashboard. You still with me, Mark? Mark snapped out of his thoughts, his gaze flicking to Claire. Yeah, just trying to wrap my head around it. It feels like the whole world is crumbling, and we're the ones trying to pick up the pieces. That's because we are. Claire's voice was firm now, her tone carrying a weight Mark wasn't used to hearing from her. It was like she'd slipped into another persona, one of someone who wasn't just trying to survive, but to fight for something bigger. You're going to have to step up, Mark. There's no more time for doubt. He didn't respond at first. Instead, he stared at her, studying her face in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. It was strange. Claire had always been the practical one, the one who kept everything running smoothly, the calm voice of reason. But now? She looked like a soldier, a leader in the making. He swallowed hard. I'll do what I can. By the time they reached the entrance to the lab, the air felt colder, the silence more oppressive. The mountain was a shadow in the night, looming above them like a watchful sentry. Claire drove past the guards, her expression unreadable as she navigated the winding roads to the hidden facility. They hadn't been stopped. Mark couldn't decide if that was a relief or a bad omen. Once inside, the sterile hallways of the lab stretched out before them, cold and silent. The hum of electricity was the only sound. Claire led the way with quiet determination, moving quickly, almost purposefully. Stay close, Claire muttered. We're almost there. As they rounded the corner, Mark felt a knot form in his stomach. What were they about to find? And would it even be enough to stop the aliens? At the end of the hallway stood a massive vault door, locked tight. Claire's fingers flew over a panel beside it, typing in a sequence that Mark couldn't follow. Hold on, she whispered. The door clicked, a deep, echoing sound, and the steel behemoth slid open with a groan. Mark's breath caught in his throat. Behind the door was something that could change everything. He stepped inside. The war for Earth had just begun. Mark stepped into the vault with a mix of awe and dread. The room was cavernous, filled with metallic hums that vibrated through his bones. Steel walls lined the edges, and at the center stood a massive cylindrical structure, its surface covered in glowing blue symbols that pulsed with a rhythm Mark couldn't understand. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, the kind of scent that clung to electronics after a surge of power. Claire moved swiftly, her footsteps echoing as she approached a console built into the floor. Her fingers danced across the keys with practiced precision, and the hum of machinery around them grew louder, almost deafening. Mark hesitated by the doorway, watching as she worked. What is this? Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Claire didn't look up, her eyes locked on the screen. It's what they've been working on here for years. It's a defense system, Mark, something to turn the tide in a fight. They started building it after the first alien encounter 2 decades ago. Mark took a step closer, his gaze drifting over the strange contraption in the middle of the room. So, what exactly is it supposed to do? Claire shot him a quick glance. It's a weapon, but not like anything we've ever seen. It uses quantum energy to manipulate gravitational fields. It's like a pulse, an explosion, but on a much larger, more destructive scale. Mark's heart skipped a beat. You think we can use it against the Kalian Empire? Claire's fingers paused, hovering over the keys. Her brow furrowed. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out how to activate it. The silence between them stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Mark glanced at the door, half expecting to hear the heavy boots of soldiers or alien agents barging in at any moment. They had no time to waste. They had no time to figure this out slowly. Suddenly, the console beeped, breaking the quiet. Claire's eyes lit up, and she quickly adjusted the parameters on the screen. Got it, she said, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Mark's breath caught in his throat. "You're sure this will work?" Claire's expression turned serious. "I don't know. But we're running out of options." Before Mark could respond, the air in the room seemed to shimmer. The symbols on the cylindrical structure flickered, shifting in intensity as though reacting to some unseen force. The entire chamber hummed to life, and the low frequency of the sound began to vibrate through Mark's chest. He stepped back, instinctively reaching for the wall to steady himself. "What's happening?" Claire didn't answer, her eyes glued to the screen. The blue light intensified, casting long shadows across the walls. "I'm initiating the energy sequence. It's going to take a minute to charge up." Mark swallowed hard. "And then what? We fire this thing at the alien ship?" "If it works," Claire said, her voice tense. "That's the plan." The ground beneath them trembled, and Mark felt a jolt of fear shoot up his spine. The air was suddenly charged with an electric current, and the walls seemed to pulse in rhythm with the growing hum. "I don't like this," Mark muttered, his nerves flaring. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something they couldn't control. "Neither do I," Claire admitted, her fingers still flying over the console, adjusting parameters faster than Mark could process. "But we don't have a choice. The Kalian fleet is already mobilizing. If we don't act, they'll wipe out everything we know." Mark clenched his fists. He had never thought he'd be caught in something like this, caught in the middle of a war, fighting to defend humanity with nothing more than their wits and a weapon they didn't understand. "I know," he said, voice hardening with resolve. "Just, hurry up." The tremors in the floor increased. The glow from the central device reached a blinding intensity, and Mark instinctively shielded his eyes with his arm. The hum became deafening, reverberating off the walls like the roar of an approaching storm. And then, it stopped. A sudden, unnatural silence descended. Mark lowered his arm, blinking against the sudden absence of sound. He turned toward Claire, his heart hammering in his chest. "Did it work?" he asked, his voice barely more than a rasp. Claire's expression was unreadable. She stood motionless, staring at the console, as though trying to make sense of the data that filled the screen. She cut herself off, eyes flickering to the wall behind Mark. The shadows seemed to shift unnaturally, as if something massive was moving just beyond the door. "Something's wrong." Mark's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Before she could answer, the door slammed open with a metallic screech, the sound reverberating through the chamber. In the doorway stood a tall figure, alien, with gleaming black armor and a face obscured by a helmet. Mark's stomach turned at the sight. It was a Kalian soldier. One of the invaders. "We knew you would come here," the alien spoke, its voice distorted and cold. "And now, you will die." The door behind the soldier slid shut, trapping them inside the chamber. Mark's blood ran cold. "Claire." Her eyes met his for a split second, filled with fear and determination. "Run," she whispered. Before he could react, the Kalian soldier lunged forward, weapon raised. The countdown had begun. The alien's weapon crackled in the air, a deadly hum as it charged up. Mark's heart raced, every muscle frozen in place. The Kalian soldier advanced, its movements smooth and calculated, its eyes hidden behind the sleek helmet. It didn't pause, didn't hesitate, just moved forward with the cold certainty of an executioner. "Claire!" Mark shouted, adrenaline flooding his veins. His hands were clammy, but they still found the nearest object, a metal rod that lay discarded by the console. He picked it up, hefting it in his grip like a club. "Get out of the way!" Claire barked, shoving Mark aside just as the Kalian soldier unleashed a burst of energy. The blast hit the wall, sending a shockwave through the room. The metal panels buckled inward, the sound of tearing steel vibrating in Mark's skull. Claire was already moving, ducking behind the central machine, her fingers flying over the controls. Mark barely managed to steady himself against the impact. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think, only act. The Kalian's weapon discharged again, narrowly missing Claire. The soldier's expression was unreadable, its posture relaxed but ready for anything. Mark could almost feel the weight of the alien's disdain, the belief that humans were little more than ants to be crushed. "We have to fight back, Mark," Claire shouted, her voice cutting through the tension. "If that thing works, we might have a chance. But we need time." Mark swallowed hard, looking at the pulsing energy of the central machine. "How much time do you need?" "I don't know. Just cover me." Claire's voice cracked with the strain of urgency. Mark nodded, though every instinct screamed to run. He couldn't, though, not when Claire needed him. Not when the survival of humanity depended on this moment. He charged forward, swinging the rod with all the strength he had left. The alien soldier sidestepped the attack effortlessly, its movements too fast, too fluid. The Kalian soldier's weapon flashed again, but this time Mark was ready. He ducked low, feeling the heat of the blast singe the air above him, and he rolled, coming to his feet just behind the alien. For a moment, he saw nothing but the gleam of metal and the faint outline of the creature's form against the harsh lighting. "Mark, now!" Claire's voice came again, sharper, more desperate. Mark didn't wait for another command. With everything he had, he lunged forward, swinging the metal rod at the Kalian soldier's unprotected back. His strike connected with a loud crack. The soldier staggered, momentarily thrown off balance, just enough for Mark to grab its weapon arm. The Kalian let out a sharp hiss and twisted, forcing Mark to the ground. It was stronger, faster, and as he struggled to regain his footing, the alien pressed its knee into his chest, pinning him to the floor. "Human resistance is futile," the soldier hissed, its voice a gravelly snarl. "You will die, like the others." Mark gritted his teeth, the pressure on his chest making it hard to breathe. But through the haze of pain and fear, something inside him snapped. The Kalian soldier wasn't invincible. It wasn't unstoppable. They had something it didn't, human resilience. The pain was nothing compared to the fight Mark had inside him. The will to survive. The will to protect the people he loved. And right now, that meant keeping the Kalian soldier from stopping Claire. Mark's free hand found the soldier's weapon, now lying beside them on the floor. He gripped it, pulling it toward himself with all the strength he could muster. With a gasp, he yanked the weapon from the alien's grasp, pressing it against its exposed side. The Kalian hissed, pushing down harder on Mark's chest, but it wasn't enough. Mark squeezed the trigger. The weapon roared to life in his hands, sending a burst of energy into the Kalian soldier. It let out a strange, guttural scream as the blast tore through its armor, sending sparks flying. For a moment, Mark thought it was over. But the alien didn't fall. Instead, it twisted, eyes wide with fury, and raised its weapon again, aiming directly at Mark. In a split second, everything slowed. He could see the soldier's eyes, the gleam of hatred there, the final strike coming toward him. Then, without warning, the pulse of the central device flared to life. The ground beneath them rumbled, and an enormous shockwave burst from the machine, washing over the room. The Kalian soldier's weapon was torn from its grasp as the force of the pulse slammed into it, sending it sprawling backward. Mark barely had time to react. The energy from the device engulfed the soldier, stripping away its armor and burning through its body with an intensity Mark couldn't comprehend. The Kalian let out one final, unearthly scream before the light consumed it entirely. The room fell silent again, the echoes of the battle still vibrating in Mark's skull. He gasped for air, chest heaving. Sweat dripped down his face as he pushed himself up, glancing over at Claire. She stood by the control panel, hands shaking, but her expression was one of triumph. "We did it," she whispered, her voice strained with exhaustion. Mark nodded, not trusting his voice. He turned to look at the charred remains of the Kalian soldier, still smoking in the center of the room. For a moment, he didn't know whether to feel relief or disbelief. Then, the quiet was shattered by a voice that Mark would never forget. "Congratulations," the voice said, cold and mechanical. "You have won this battle. But the war has just begun." Mark's blood turned to ice as the voice echoed through the lab, coming from all directions, its tone full of chilling promise. The Kalian Empire was far from defeated. But neither was humanity. The fight was far from over.